The scratching sound came from directly above my bed. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe a squirrel on the roof. But as I lay there in the darkness, my eyes wide open, I realized it was too rhythmic, too deliberate to be anything but human. I'd been hearing strange noises in my attic for weeks. Now little thuds and creaks that I dismissed as the usual sounds an old house makes. But tonight was different tonight. The sounds were unmistakable. My heart raced as I slowly sat up in bed, careful not to make a sound. The scratching continued, steady and persistent. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. But as soon as I pressed the call button, the scratching stopped abruptly. I held my breath, the phone pressed to my ear, waiting for the operator to pick up. The silence in the house was deafening. Then just as I heard a voice on the other end of the line, a loud thud came from the attic, followed by quick, heavy footsteps. 911. What's your emergency? I whispered urgently into the phone. There's someone in my attic. Please hurry. I gave them my address and hung up, my entire body shaking. The footsteps above had stopped, but I could hear faint rustling sounds. Whoever was up there was still moving around. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floor. I needed to get out of the house, but the stairs to the first floor were directly beneath the attic access. If I tried to leave, I'd be right in the intruder's path. Instead, I crept to my closet and grabbed the baseball bat I kept there for protection. My palms were sweaty as I gripped it tightly, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. Where were the police? I strained my ears, hoping to hear sirens, but all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the occasional creak from above. Then a new sound made my blood run cold. It was coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. The soft scraping of the attic access panel being moved. My throat tightened as I realized the intruder was coming down. I pressed myself against the wall next to my bedroom door, the bat raised and ready. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. The hallway floorboards creaked under the weight of slow, careful footsteps. They paused just outside my door. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door began to open. In the dim light from my window, I saw a shadow fall across the floor as the figure stepped into the room. I swung the bat with all my might. There was a sickening thud and a cry of pain. The intruder stumbled backward, and I took the opportunity to run. I bolted past him down the stairs and out the front door into the cool night air. I ran to my neighbor's house, pounding on their door until the porch light flicked on as they opened the door. I finally heard the blessed sound of police sirens in the distance. The next hour was a blur of police statements and questions. They searched my house thoroughly, but found no sign of the intruder. They assured me that they would increase patrols in the area and suggested I stay with a friend for a few days, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they had missed something. The way the intruder had moved, how they seemed to know the layout of my house. It felt too familiar, too practiced against my better judgment. I decided to stay. I couldn't explain it, but I needed to know what was happening in my own home. The next day I called a locksmith and had every lock in the house changed. I installed a security system with cameras covering every entrance. But even with these precautions, I couldn't relax. Every little sound made me jump, and I found myself constantly checking the attic access panel. A week passed without incident, but my unease grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even when I was alone in the house. I started noticing little things out of place. A book moved on the shelf. A cup in the sink I didn't remember using. I knew I was probably being paranoid, but I couldn't help myself. I started spending hours examining every inch of my house, looking for any sign of how the intruder had gotten in it. Was during one of these searches that I found it. I was in the spare bedroom running my hands along the baseboards when I felt a slight heave in the wall. My heart rised as I pressed harder, and suddenly a small section of the wall swung inward behind. It was a narrow passage. dark and musty. I shone my flashlight inside, revealing a crude ladder leading up to the attic. My hands shook as I realized the truth. There had been a hidden entrance to my attic this whole time. I should have called the police right then, but curiosity and a need for answers overrode my common sense. I took a deep breath and started climbing. The attic was bigger than I had imagined, stretching the entire length of the house. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing piles of boxes and old furniture. But as I moved deeper into the space, I saw something that made my stomach churn. In the far corner, hidden behind a stack of old trunks, was a makeshift living area. There was a sleeping bag on the floor, surrounded by empty food, wrappers and water bottles. A small battery-powered lamp sat on an overturned crate, next to a pile of books. What really caught my eye was the wall behind this little camp. It was covered in photographs, dozens of them. As I stepped closer, my breath caught in my throat. They were all of me there. I was walking to my car, working in the garden, sitting in my living room. Some were clearly taken from outside the house, but others could only have been taken from inside. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had been living in my attic, watching me for months. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. I had to get out, had to call the police. But as I turned to leave, my flashlight beam fell on something that made me freeze. It was a small door, built into the knee wall of the attic. It was slightly ajar, and beyond it, I could see a faint light. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I found myself moving towards the door. Instead, I had to know. I had to see. I pushed the door open, slowly, wincing at the creak of its hinges. The space beyond was small, no bigger than a closet, but what it contained made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in writing, scrawled messages, and rambling paragraphs that made no sense. In the center of the room was a small table, and on it sat a laptop, its screen glowing. Softly, I stepped closer, my eyes drawn to the open document on the screen. As I read the words there, I felt the world tilt around me. Day 156. She almost caught me today. I was careless, made too much noise. But it's okay. She's not ready. Yet soon, though, soon she'll understand why I'm here, why I've been watching her. She's the one, the only one, who can help me. Help us. She just doesn't know it yet. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. This person, this stranger, had been living in my house, watching my every move for over 5 months, and they thought I was some kind of chosen one to help them with what I heard. A noise behind me and spun around, my heart in my throat. There, blocking the entrance to the small room, stood a figure in the dim light. I could make out wild, unkempt hair and eyes that gleamed with an unsettling intensity. You weren't supposed to find this yet, the stranger said there, voice hoarse, but maybe it's time. Maybe you're finally ready to learn the truth. I backed away, my back pressing against the table. Who are you? What do you want from me? The stranger stepped forward, and I caught a whiff of unwashed body and stale food. I'm here to save you. To save all of us. You're the key. Don't you see your research? Your work, it's the answer we've been looking for. My mind raced. My research. I was a data analyst for a small tech company. How could that be the answer to anything? You're confused, you're scared. I understand, the stranger continued, taking another step closer. But soon you'll see, soon you'll understand why I had to do this. Why I had to watch you, learn everything about you. I glanced around, desperately looking for a way out, but the stranger blocked the only exit. I was trapped. Please, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't understand, just tell me what you want. The stranger's face softened, an unsettling smile spreading across their features. What? I want you to fulfill your destiny. I want you to use your skills to decode the message that will save us all. As they spoke, I noticed a small remote control on the table next to the laptop. Without thinking, I grabbed it and pointed it at the stranger. Stay back, I yelled, hoping to startle them. To my surprise, the stranger's eyes widened in fear. No, they screamed. Don't press that, you'll ruin everything. In my confusion, my finger slipped, pressing one of the buttons. Suddenly, a high-pitched wail filled the air. It was my new security system's alarm. The stranger howled in frustration and lunged at me, but I ducked under their arm and ran. I scrambled through the attic, down the hidden passage, and out into the hallway. I could hear the stranger crashing behind me, but I didn't look back. I ran out of the house and into the street, the alarm still blaring behind me as police sirens approached in the distance. I stood there shaking and gasping for breath. My quiet life had been shattered, my sense of safety destroyed, and I was left with a chilling realization. Sometimes the monsters aren't hiding under the bed or in the closet. Sometimes they're right above us, watching and waiting. The headlights flickered once on twice, and then died, completely plunging us into darkness. The engine sputtered its last gasp, and our car rolled to a stop on the narrow, winding road. I turned the key in the ignition, but all I got was a sad clicking. Sound we were stranded. This can't be happening, Sarah muttered beside me, her voice tight with frustration. I could barely make out her silhouette in the dim moonlight filtering through the trees. I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I'd see. No signal. We were miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest. The GPS had gone haywire about an hour ago, leading us down this lonely stretch of road that wasn't even on our map. What do we do now, Jack? Sarah asked, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. I squinted through the windshield, trying to pierce the darkness. That's when I saw a faint glow in the distance off to our right. Look, I said, pointing. There's a light, must be a house or something. Maybe they have a phone weekend. Sarah hesitated. I don't know, walking up to a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere, it seems risky. I understood her concern, but we didn't have many options. It's either that or spend the night in the car and hope someone drives by tomorrow, which, judging by how deserted this road is, might not happen. She sighed, relenting. Okay, but let's be careful. We grabbed our flashlights from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car. The night air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of pine and wet earth. Our footsteps crunched on the gravel as we made our way towards the light. As we got closer, I could make out the shape of a large farmhouse. It was old, with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but warm light spilled from the windows, promising shelter and help. We approached the front door, and I raised my hand to knock before I could. The door swung open, revealing a tall, thin man with graying hair and deep-set eyes. Well, hello there, he said, his voice growly but not unkind. What brings you folks out here so late? I explained our situation, and the man's face broke into a sympathetic smile. Car trouble? Hey, that's a tough break. Names. Earl, why don't you two come on in, and we'll see about getting you some help. Sarah squeezed my hand, a silent reminder to be cautious, but Earl's friendly demeanor and the warmth emanating from the house were too inviting to resist. We stepped inside, and I was immediately struck by how cluttered the place was. Every surface was covered with knickknacks, old newspapers, and what looked like mechanical parts. The air was thick with the smell of tobacco and something else I couldn't quite place. Martha, Earl called out. Now we've got company. A short, plump woman with frizzy gray hair appeared from what I assumed was the kitchen. She wiped her hands on her apron and gave us a wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, my visitors at this hour. How exciting, she exclaimed, her voice high. And Ray, you poor dears must be exhausted. Why don't you have a seat in the living room while I fix you some tea? Before we could protest, Martha ushered us into a cramped room dominated by a large, threadbare sofa. The walls were covered in old photographs, their subjects staring at us with blank eyes. Earl settled into a worn armchair across from us. So where are you folks headed? I told them about our trip to visit Sarah's parents, careful not to give too many details. As I spoke, I noticed Earl's eyes darting between us as if sizing us up. Martha bustled in with a tray of tea and cookies. As she set it down, I caught a whiff of that strange smell again. It reminded me of chemicals, like something you'd find in a garage. Now then, Earl said, leaning forward, about your car. I'm pretty. Handy with engines, why don't I take a look at it in the morning? It's too dark now, and these roads can be dangerous at night. Sarah and I exchanged glances. The thought of spending the night here made me uneasy, but the alternative walking back to our car in the dark seemed even less appealing. That's very kind of you, Sarah said cautiously, but we wouldn't want to impose. If we could just use your phone to call for a tow truck. Oh, I'm afraid our phone. Lynn's been down for days, Martha chimed. In her smile, never wavering. Terrible service out here, you know. But don't you worry. We have plenty of room. You can stay in the guest bedroom upstairs. As she spoke, I noticed a dark stain on her apron. It looked fresh, and in the dim light it appeared. Almost read Earl must have noticed me staring, because he quickly stood up, blocking my view of Martha. Well, it's settled, and you'll stay the night, and we'll sort out your car in the morning. Now, how about some dinner? Martha makes a mean stew, Lee. Mention of food made my stomach growl, reminding me that we hadn't eaten since lunch, despite my unease. I found myself nodding as we followed them to the dining room. I whispered to Sarah, something feels off about this place. She nodded slightly. I know, but what choice do we have? Let's just get through the night and leave first thing in the morning. The dining room was as cluttered as the rest of the house. The table was set with mismatched plates and tarnished silverware. Martha ladled out bowls of thick dark stew that smelled surprisingly good as we ate. Earl regaled us with store about the farm and the surrounding area. He seemed to know every inch of the forest, describing hidden caves and forgotten trails with vivid detail. You know, he said, his eyes glinting in the candlelight, people have been known to disappear in these woods, hikers, campers, even the occasional lost traveler. I felt Sarah stiffen beside me. Earl's tone was casual, almost cheerful, but there was an undercurrent of something, a warning, a threat. Martha tittered nervously. Oh, Earl, don't scare our guests with those old stories. I'm sure they're tired and would like to get some rest. As if on cue, I felt a wave of drowsiness wash over me. My limbs felt heavy, and I had to fight to keep my eyes open. I glanced at Sarah and saw that she was struggling too, her head nodding forward, slightly alarmed. Bells started ringing in my head, but they seemed far away, muffled. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I think we should go to bed. I managed to slur out. Earl's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Of course. Martha, why don't you show our guests to their room? The trip up the stairs was a blur. I vaguely remember Martha's constant chatter as she led us to a small, musty bedroom with a single bed. As soon as she left Sarah, and I collapsed onto the mattress, too groggy to do anything but succumb to the encroaching darkness. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke with a start. My head pounding. The room was pitch black, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The car, the farmhouse, Earl and Martha. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to check the time. 3:17 a.m. Sarah was still asleep beside me, her breathing deep, and even that's when I heard voices, muffled but audible, coming from somewhere below us. I strained to listen, catching snippets of conversation. Perfect condition. Fetch a good price. Have to move quickly. My blood ran cold as the implications of what I was hearing and sank in. We needed to get out of here now. I shook Sarah awake, clamping a hand over her mouth to stifle her startled cry. We have to go, I whispered urgently. Something's very wrong here. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. We crept to the door, wincing at every creak of the old floorboards. The hallway was dark and silent, but I could still hear the murmur of voices from downstairs. We made our way down the stairs, pausing at every sound. As we reached the bottom, I saw light spilling from beneath a closed door at the basement. I realized we were almost to the front door when a floorboard let out a loud groan under my foot. The voices in the basement suddenly stopped. Did you hear that? Earl's voice, no longer friendly, but sharp with suspicion. Sarah and I didn't wait. We bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock behind us. I heard the basement door open, followed by rapid footsteps. We burst out into the cool night air, running blindly down the overgrown driveway. I could hear Earl shouting behind us, his words lost in the pounding of my heart. We ran until our lungs burned, not daring to look back when we finally stopped gasping for air. We found ourselves back on the road where we left our car. To our amazement, the car started on the first. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds chirping, no leaves rustling, just an eerie stillness that seemed to swallow every sound. I had been hiking for hours, my boots crunching over fallen leaves and twigs, but now even that seemed muffled. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. I checked my phone again, still no signal. The GPS had stopped working about an hour ago, leaving me with nothing but a vague sense that I was heading in the right direction. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, painting the trees with long shadows that seemed to reach for me like grasping fingers. I should have turned back when I realized I was lost, should have retraced my steps and found my way to the marked trail. But something kept pulling me forward, a mixture of stubbornness and curiosity that I would soon regret. As the light faded, I spotted a flicker of brightness through the trees. Hope surged through me. Maybe it was a ranger station or a campsite. I quickened my pace, pushing through the underbrush towards the light. What I found instead made me stop in my tracks. Nestled in a clearing was a collection of ramshackle buildings there, windows glowing with warm, inviting light. Smoke curled from crooked chimneys, and I could hear the faint murmur of voices carried on the evening breeze. Relief washed over me. I had found people, civilization of a sort. They could help me get back to my car, or at least point me in the right direction. I stepped into the clearing, waving to catch someone's attention. The reaction was immediate and unsettling. The voices cut off abruptly, and I saw curtains twitching, windows as faces peered out at me. A door creaked open, and a man stepped out onto a porch, his weathered face set in a wary frown. Evening, I called out, trying to keep my voice friendly and non-threatening. I'm sorry to intrude, but I've gotten a bit turned around on the trails. I was hoping you could point me back to the main road. The man didn't respond. Immediately, his eyes, dark and deep-set, scanned me from head to toe. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, as if unused to conversation. Ain't no roads around here. Stranger, this is Piney Grove. We don't get many visitors. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Something about the way he said visitors made it sound like a dirty word. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to trespass, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. If you could just give me directions to the nearest town, I'll be on my way. The man's frown deepened. Nearest towns, a fair ways off, getting dark. Soon ain't safe in these woods at night. As if on cue, I heard a distant howl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't sound like any wolf or coyote I'd ever heard. The man seemed to come to a decision. Reckon you better come inside. We'll sort you out in the morning. Part of me wanted to refuse to turn and run back into the forest, but the rational part of my brain knew it would be suicide. I was lost. It was getting dark, and who knew what kind of animals were out there. Reluctantly, I nodded and followed him towards one of the larger buildings. As we walked, I noticed more people emerging from the other houses. They watched me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, their faces gaunt and pale in the fading light. Children peered around their parents' legs, their eyes wide and unblinking. The inside of the building was dimly lit by oil lamps, casting flickering shadows on walls covered in faded floral wallpaper. The furniture looked ancient, as if it had been passed down through generations. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and something else, something earthy and slightly sweet that I couldn't quite place. Name's Ezekiel, the man said, gesturing for me to sit at a worn wooden table. This here's my wife. Martha, a thin woman with long gray hair, nodded at me from near the fireplace. Her eyes never left me as she stirred something in a large pot hanging over the flames. I'm Lisa, I said, forcing a smile. Thank you for your hospitality." Ezekiel grunted in response. "You'll stay here tonight in the morning. We'll see about getting you back where you came from." I wanted to protest, to insist on leaving right away, but I knew it would be pointless. I was at their mercy, at least for now. Martha ladled some stew into a chipped bowl and set it in front of me. The smell made my stomach growl, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since that morning. I took a cautious bite, surprised by the rich GY flavor. "What kind of meat is this?" I asked, more to break the uncomfortable silence and out of real curiosity. "Best not to ask questions you don't want answers to, Ezekiel," replied, his tone making it clear that the subject was closed. As I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong here. The way Ezekiel and Martha watched me, the strange silence from outside, the odd smell that seemed to permeate everything, it all added up to a sense of wrongness that made my skin crawl. After dinner, Martha showed me to a small room upstairs. The bed was lumpy, and the blankets smelled musty, but I was too exhausted to care. I lay down fully clothed and tried to sleep. I must have dozed off, because I woke with a start, disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back: the hike, getting lost, finding Piney Grove. A noise from outside caught my attention. Voices, low and urgent, drifted up from below. I crept to the window, careful not to make any noise, and peered out in the moonlight. I could see a group of people gathered in the center of the clearing. They were dressed in long robes, their faces hidden by hoods. In the center of the circle stood Ezekiel, his arms raised as he spoke in a language I didn't recognize. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the strange ritual unfold. What kind of place had I stumbled into? Suddenly, one of the robed figures looked up straight at my window. I ducked down, praying they hadn't seen me. I waited, barely breathing, for what felt like hours. When I finally dared to look again, the clearing was empty. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay in bed, every creak of the old house making me jump. As soon as the first light of dawn crept through the window, I made my decision. I had to get out of here. I eased the door open, wincing at every squeak of the hinges. The house was silent. As I crept down the stairs, my heart in my throat, I had just reached the front door when a voice behind me made me freeze. "Leaving so soon?" I turned slowly to see Ezekiel standing at the foot of the stairs, his eyes glittering in the dim light. I thought I'd get an early start," I stammered, reaching for the door handle. Ezekiel took a step towards me. "Ain't polite to leave without saying goodbye, especially when you've seen things you shouldn't." My blood ran cold. "I didn't see anything," I lied, my voice shaking. "Please, I just want to go home." He shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid that ain't possible. You see, Piney Grove has ways of dealing with outsiders who learn our secrets." I didn't wait to hear more. I yanked the door open and ran, my feet pounding on the dirt. As I sprinted towards the trees behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. I ran blindly through the forest branches, whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The strange howling cry I heard the night before echoed through the trees, closer now, and filled with a hungry eagerness that sent chills down my spine. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. The sounds of pursuit faded, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still after me, something that didn't need to run to catch its prey. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, I burst out of the trees onto a paved road. A car was approaching, and I waved my arms frantically, not caring how crazy I must look. The car screeched to a halt, and an elderly couple peered out at me in concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my wild appearance. I glanced back at the forest. There was no sign of pursuit, but I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows between the trees. "Please," I gasped, "I need to get out of here. Can you give me a ride to the nearest town?" They hesitated for only a moment before nodding, and I scrambled into the back seat. As we drove away, I kept my eyes on the receding tree line, half expecting to see robed figures emerge from the forest. But there was nothing, just trees and shadows hiding whatever secrets lay within. I never reported what happened in Piney Grove. Who would believe me sometimes? Late at night, I still hear that strange howl in my dreams, and I wake up in a cold sweat, grateful for the familiar sounds of the city around me. But I know the truth out there deep in the forest, where no roads lead, Piney Grove is waiting, and I pray that no other lost hiker ever stumbles upon its secrets.